Hello, my name is Matthew Taylor and welcome to our Bush Broadcast Autumn Webinar. I'm joining you today from the land of the Gadigal traditional custodians of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders both past and present and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians who are going to be online with us today. Please join me and take a moment to recognise what an incredible privilege it is to be standing on the beautiful lands that have been stewarded by first Australians for tens of thousands of years. And talking of other incredible things, we're very fortunate to have today two of our senior leadership team joining us. We have our Bush Heritage CEO, Rachel Lowry, and Dr. Bruce Webber, who's our Executive Manager of Science and Conservation. And they're going to be talking to us about how is Bush Heritage tracking against the ambitious goals we set ourselves for deepening and doubling our impact by 2030. And we're well on the road to achieving that 10-year plan. Now, as always, please use the chat function at the bottom right of your screen to say good day and let us know where you're calling in from. And that's the right place to also post any questions you may have that come up during the webinar, and we'll be getting to those for a Q&A section at the end. So let's get started. Welcome, Rachel.
Hello. Thanks.
Where are you joining us from today?
I am in Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country here in Melbourne, Naarm, and I think you are too.
I
Bruce,
am.
Down at the
I am today.
headquarters.
I'm usually joining from Wajak Noongar Boja in Western Australia, but today, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it'd be nice to kick off if I can ask you to each just briefly introduce yourself for anybody in our audience who may not have had the chance to pop into one of these webinars or meet up with you. Perhaps, Rachel, you can kick us off.
Love to. Thanks, Matthew. Yes, hello all. I was about to say good morning, but it's not here on the East Coast at least. It's just hit midday. I'm Rachel Lowry and I'm the CEO of Bush Heritage Australia, and it's something that I never take for granted because I feel very fortunate to be in this incredible role, in this incredible organisation. And I feel particularly fortunate to be sharing progress updates on a strategy that, to be very honest, attracted me to this organisation 2.5 years ago. It was the ambition and the clarity and the need in the Australian context that we all live in for a strategy like this one that made it a very easy choice to apply for this incredible role. So it really is lovely to be here and in a position where we can report on progress. Over to you, Bruce.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, Bruce Webber. I'm the Executive Manager of Science and Conservation, an incredible role, in fact, my dream job. I've been with Bush Heritage now for 9 months, so a relatively new arrival, but have thoroughly enjoyed those 9 months getting settled in to the role, understanding the opportunities. Why am I here? I love the fact that this organisation uses the best possible science, and my background is as a global change ecologist. It uses the best possible science to make the biggest difference in terms of impact to future conservation. And it walks the talk. We have a wonderful reputation for getting stuff done. And that's what I've seen over the last 9 months. We get out there and we do it, and we do it with great science.
Well, great intro into talking our subject matter for today, the 2030 strategy. This was a big, ambitious plan to deepen and double our impact by 2030, which involves protecting, restoring, and regenerating a total of 30 million hectares of land. That's a big chunk. Someone will tell me in my ear, hopefully, how big that is, but it's certainly the size of several small countries put together. So perhaps we can kick off by letting us know why we needed to develop this strategy. You know, every organisation has one, but why did we particularly need to do that? Rachel, perhaps to you first.
You filled that question, Matthew, and I do so worrying that I'm getting an unstable network connection signal, which is at a time I do not want it. So let me spot, and I will seamlessly hand to Bruce and do that. But I suppose if we start from an international context, at the turn of this decade, and it was done so because there was a recognition of the significant scale of loss across biodiversity and the significance to both our natural world and humanity more broadly. It was developed with staff and donors and partners, asking the question of how we build on the success of what at the time was our very successful first 30 years as an ENGO. We had achieved some significant things in those first 3 decades. Very proud of what we had achieved. We'd learnt a lot and we felt like we were only getting started. And there was a very strong recognition of the important role that the private land conservation sector plays in securing critical landscapes, securing connectivity, securing some of these last remaining frontier ecosystems and species that are within them. And so the ambition to deepen and double our impact within this critical decade felt like the right one, whilst recognising there's an element of it that's a moonshot. We hear that. It's big and it's bold, but it's needed, and we committed to finding a way. And we are at the point now where there's just 45 months decade, and there's certainly some wind beneath our sails, which is under our wings, so to speak. Consultation, and that's the context it was developed in, and it's serving us well even of this decade.
So perhaps, Bruce, I can ask you then to take us through what are the 3 main pillars of that strategy that drive all the goals and plans and our efforts in the field.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So the core pillar for us, and the one that has been sort of a long-standing pillar for us, is that focused around our reserves. As a private land conservation organisation, we purchase land and actively manage that land. It's not enough these days to buy land and lock up and leave it. There's too many threats, climate change, invasive species and the like, to simply do that. So we actively get better conservation outcomes across those reserves. But equally, as an organisation, we recognise the knowledge we develop on those reserves and the knowledge we can gather from others beyond our reserves is equally as important. And so we have 2 other pillars that allow us to expand our impact across the nation. And that is the second pillar there you can see in the middle, and that's the collaborations we have with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partnerships. In terms of developing and delivering right-way science, we deliver those outcomes both on our reserves, but also on lands owned and managed by our partners in that space. Some great examples that we may get to later in the conversation today. And then the third and more recent partnership we have is recognising that there are very large areas of land across the country under agricultural management, but equally we can achieve great biodiversity outcomes on agricultural land. And actually we can use agricultural land to build strength and build connection between those parcels of land in bushland. So we are partnering in an increasingly strong way with agriculturalists right across the country, exploring how we can bring natural capital into our assets and delivering impact. And so it's about increasing the amount of land managed under these 3 pillars. For our reserves, we're looking to double that from 1.2 to 2.4 million hectares. From our Aboriginal partnerships, we're looking to have, currently we have 10 million hectares under management through those partnerships, but we're looking to extend that to 20 million. And from our agricultural and natural capital partnerships, we're looking to take that out to 10 million hectares. So these are, as Rachel said, very big, strong and ambitious goals, but they are absolutely achievable, and they allow us to achieve profound impact right across the nation.
They're certainly not comfortable figures, but that's the nature of setting yourself a big, hairy, audacious goal, as some of the management consultants say, don't they? So I think we've done that, haven't we, in this case, and making good progress. So you quoted some great figures there, Bruce. Perhaps now we can talk about the other side of the statement we use of deepening and doubling. Goals that are quantitative are relatively straightforward. Perhaps now we can explore the deepening aspect and what that means, because I know that's a very important word in our language. And perhaps, Rachel, you can give us a first thought on that, and then we'll get your perspective as well, Bruce.
Yeah, happy to. And I've got to say, I find the goals exciting. I find them energizing at a time when we need to be aspirational. But it's not to say that it's easy, and we'll unpack that, no doubt. On deepening, I will argue that deepening and getting that right is the most critical and most important part of strategy. Why? Because we've made a promise to these incredible, often last of their kind landscapes and the ecosystems within and the species that call those landscapes home. And we've made a promise to protect them. We've made a promise to do better. And that's what deepening is about. It's our conservation effort and continuing to do better. It's an area we'll never arrive because we will always be striving to be better. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Bruce's role is so critical in the organisation and his team, our science and conservation team, because we have to be powered by science. We can't just take for granted that the work that we're doing is living up to our promise. We need good monitoring, we need good evaluation, and we need to keep embracing disruptive ways of protecting healthy country and managing our landscapes so that we can reach greater heights and go deeper. I can see a number of great examples coming up on the screen now where we've done exactly that. But Bruce, I know that since you joined the organisation, you've certainly been working hard to think through how we can drive some changes across the org to really scale up the deepening promise as well of the strategy. I wonder if you can shed light on some of the early thinking that's coming through there.
Yeah, absolutely, Rachel. Certainly the first part of that is really ensuring we have great clarity on how we monitor the improvements we're doing, the active management we're doing right across our landscapes, not only in terms of the interventions we deploy, so whether we're controlling invasive species or replanting large areas of degraded land. We need to monitor that. We need to monitor the work we're doing, how much effort we're putting to that, the return on that investment so we can improve those methods. But we also need to monitor what that does for the natural biodiversity values in those landscapes. So if we are controlling rabbits, for example, we need to monitor how we reduce the numbers of rabbits, but then we need to also monitor the rebound in the native vegetation alongside that. Doing all of that monitoring and having those interventions can be quite time consuming. But we're looking to harness the benefits of new technology. So bringing in remote sensing, bringing in camera traps, as you can see on the screen there, ensuring that our ecologists are equipped with the latest technologies to make the monitoring they do more efficient and effective. We have some great partnerships with university organizations bringing in knowledge beyond the amazing in-house experience we have. Achieving great things in that space. So at the end of the day, for a given dollar spent on monitoring and managing and intervening on our properties, we can get greater return for investment. And we are seeing some great movement in that space, and we're going to be rolling that out in larger amounts over the next few years. That data is incredibly powerful when it's fed back into an adaptive management process. So every time we get some insight popping out the other end, we reassess the methods we're deploying at the front end and work out how we can achieve better outcomes, even better than that.
And are there some specific examples you can give us there, Bruce, of where we've been doing this steepening?
Many great examples, Matthew. Let me start with one. And we can expand beyond that. I think, as someone based in Western Australia at the moment, I can't go beyond work in the Southwest. We're part of a really great initiative, variously referred to as Gondwana Link, connecting up the Stirling Ranges National Park with the Fitzgerald River National Park. And this is an area that's been exposed to some significant clearing over time in the southwest of Western Australia. And it's a very fragmented landscape, as you can see there. That's the Stirling Ranges in the bottom left-hand corner and the Fitzgerald River National Park in the top right-hand corner. And through acquisition of existing remnant vegetation in this space and some very bold, ambitious restoration of once degraded farmland, we are slowly but surely linking back up the connectivity through that landscape. And you can see why this is so important in terms of local endemism on this slide illustrated here. The variation we have between these individual reserves is absolutely phenomenal. And we don't have a scale bar here on this picture, but this is small scale variation and incredible local endemism in a very small landscape. So we're using very ambitious ways to restore here. So a great example that I'm going to be talking more on tonight in another presentation is where we're using widely available agricultural machinery, so traditional air seeding type machinery, which is usually used for seeding grain in these landscapes. And we're harnessing that to actually restore native seeds and native vegetation, which is usually very hard because the size of native seeds varies considerably. From very big to very small seeds. But if we standardize those by coating them in clay, we can then push them through an air seeder at vast volumes and restore at a scale that is unprecedented and with much greater efficiency. So that's one example from this landscape. Another example from this landscape is tackling some of the threats to this restoration. We've just wrapped up a 5-year project there where we've been actively monitoring and targeting foxes and cats in these landscapes. We know that foxes and particularly cats are a significant threat to small critical weight mammals, malleefowls as well in these landscapes. So we did a very large scale management program there, including the deployment of a very new trap that is under development at Bush Heritage at the moment. This is a very exciting technological development, a hand trap it's called. It's a net-based trap that uses AI to work out how to catch cats and when to catch cats and when to activate that trap. So these are all little iterative things that we are deploying with collaborations across this landscape. As you would have seen from that landscape before, there are many different collaborators required to achieve outcomes at scale. So it's a wonderful collaboration. It's ongoing work in progress, but we're seeing some really good returns on investment already.
And I think it would be great to explain how we actually measure deepening on the ground, Bruce, because I know there's some very specific things that you need to review and report on progress at a number of different scales, aren't there, to check that we're actually doing our job well. Can you talk a little bit to that?
No, it's a really good point, and it's all well and good for us to deploy highly effective management, but if we aren't actually tracking the progress of that management, then we aren't able to report on it. And we report on this in many different ways and at many different scales. Probably the one that most people on this call are mostly aware of is the reporting we do, as you can see on the screen there, in our impact reports. This is higher level reporting, but it builds on a much deeper, more profound set of data that at the other end of the scale is used to underpin scientific publications. And so it's very important for us to ensure that when we do go out and deploy an intervention, in that Southwest example, it's the seeding of new vegetation or it's the management of invasive species. We need to know how much effort goes into that process. We need to know the outcomes of that direct process. And then indirectly from that, we need to understand how that improves the conservation values in that landscape. So we are very clearly identifying what those values are in that landscape and making sure we capture those metrics against that. And we're building back-end data pipelines to make sure all of that data is available at the right scale and in the right way, bringing that together for those different various types of reports that we push out. Allows us to be accountable for all the conservation work we're doing.
Well, it sounds like from what you've both been saying that effectively deepening is ensuring that we're doing our nature conservation job, we're just doing it better, more effectively and over greater scale. Is that a simple way of capturing it? Yeah.
It's nature conservation done better. And you would have seen all of the words around building resilience in landscapes, improving conservation outcomes in landscapes. All of those things contribute to nature conservation done better.
And I guess tracking these trends over time, isn't it, in response to things like climate change and land clearing and other threats that might be changing as well.
Absolutely, Matthew. And we're in an incredibly unique position. The rarity of long-term temporal data sets of change in our landscapes there's very few areas and few organizations that are in a position to collect that sort of data, and we're one of them. And so we're very much harnessing the power of these long-term data sets to understand change, hopefully improvement, but equally in an era where there are so many threats coming at our landscapes, actually even holding a line is really important in some of our landscapes. We may not always show improvement in this landscapes, but we need to understand that even holding the line can be really good for conservation outcomes. We also work in landscapes that change over many, many years. And particularly in our drier, sort of arid landscapes, there are big long-term natural cycles that we need to add in. So this long-term understanding to really show that we're improving conservation outcomes depends on the integrity of long-term data sets. And I think it's worth pointing out that as we are transitioning into these new forms of data collection, deploying drones, deploying camera traps, acoustic monitoring, and things like that, we're always ensuring that that new method is always backwards compatible with the methods we've had up to now, so we can maintain that temporal trajectory to time, make sure always we're getting that long-term temporal insight.
Excellent. Well, thanks for giving us that little bit of extra detail into
Pleasure.
Your life and your work. So here we are in 2026. We're just past the midpoint of the 2030 strategy, which covers a period of 10 years. It'd be interesting to understand your perspective, both of you, on the achievements we've got to so far and where we stand. There's a lovely graphic coming up on the screen there from Megan, which shows progress, the classic bar chart. Perhaps, Rachel, you can take us through some of the high-level responses there, and we can dive a bit deeper afterwards.
Yeah, I'm really happy to, Matthew, and I find this question to be my favourite because it's talking about the wins to date inside the window of this strategy. I want to acknowledge the first couple of years of this strategy was really making sure we had the science right, getting the criteria informing our decision making, getting through COVID, lockdowns and things like that. And yet we've still got some great wins to report and some exciting momentum on the up, which means the strategy is achieving what it set out to achieve. The strategy is asking us to lift and to not just lift incrementally and slowly, but to really do what we can to meet that aspirational goal. So what you saw on that slide there is that we've managed to increase the support that so many of our generous supporters give to bush heritage because they see the value of this strategy. They see the importance of the wins. So we're on our way. We're lifting. And we've still got our eye on where we need to get to, which is that 56.4 million, to be able to truly deepen across these landscapes that we are promising and committing to. We know that we need to continue that trajectory. We have secured 9 new properties inside this strategic window, and that has increased our hectares by over 200,000 to date. And Bruce spoke before to the partnership wins. Our agricultural partnerships have gone up from 400,000 hectares to over 10.4 million we're influencing at the moment through those partnerships. That's similar for Aboriginal partnerships. But there's a story with Aboriginal partnerships as well around the number of staff, Aboriginal partnership managers we've been able to invest in, so that we now have Aboriginal partnership managers in almost every state and territory. That's an achievement in its own right. Thanks, Megan, for bringing that up. If we think back to 2021 when this strategy kicked off, we had one incredible person managing our partnerships across the nation, and just to see the number of Aboriginal partnership managers out on ground supporting the right way science and the partnerships is in itself an achievement. On the purchases, the 9 purchases, if we can switch through to that, I think it's probably worth just acknowledging those because there are so many people that would be joining on this webinar who made that happen, and they're significant wins. So that's them right there. ecosystems and landscapes that, had we not intervened based on our risk assessments, would not be here by 2030. That's the level of confidence that we have based on these risk assessments. So we've got some wins in Dja Dja Wurrung country there in central Victoria, the John Douglas block up on the screen right now. Edie Garrop, Bruce Webber just spoke before about the significance of that landscape across the Fitz-Stirling. Glover's Flat, which is probably the first property I think my kids walked through when I got this role, so they often ask me how it's faring out there in Tassie. Evelyn Downs, our most significant from size point of view, win, larger than the size of ACT, and starting to see some incredible gains in that landscape now that we've removed cattle. Sandstrom, back on Dja Dja Wurrung country, which I know our ecology team and team on the ground love, because we don't have to ask for permission to walk from one reserve to the next. So we're building connectivity in that critical Victorian landscape. Dodgy Downs, we've had a good laugh about that name, and I don't think it'll ever wear thin, that particular joke. But back in the Fitz-Stirling, again, another connectivity piece amongst that broader vision. Nil Desperandum, incredible story of freshwater conservation and connectivity linking up to Lowry, which was a real exciting win to land last year. More recently, Avocet in Brigalow bioregion in Queensland, which is Queensland's most underrepresented and threatened bioregion, now linking up to Goondaroo Reserve. So exciting momentum there across those wins, and I'm going to say I still think we have our best years in this strategy ahead of us, because there is that momentum that we are building upon. Our supporters, and again, I just want to say thank you. They're seeing that when we put that call out, that's based on the science, it's based on eyes wide open with the threat severity and the fact that we would stand to lose as a nation these incredible threatened, underrepresented ecosystems. People know that this critical decade calls on us to step in and to get this connectivity in these landscapes now while we can. I think on the partnerships front, there is other stories to tell. Bruce has shared a few. If we have time, Matthew, I could hand to Bruce, because I've mentioned achievements from a high level of numbers and hectares and investments in staff. There's investments in ecologists as well. I think we had about 6 or 7 at the beginning of this strategy that we employed at Bush Heritage. We're close to 30 now. But Bruce, anything on the partnerships front that you want to unpack and shed light on when we're talking progress and achievements?
Oh, look, Rachel, I think one of the things that's really a huge strength from our engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partnerships is the culturally informed burning program. We have a national fire management program across the organisation, which makes a huge amount of sense. It allows us to deploy fire-focused resources in a reactive and proactive way to whichever landscape we need, whenever we need it. But a lot of the work that goes into the planning, particularly around the proactive burns, is very carefully developed in a culturally informed way. This is deployed both on our reserves as well as through land beyond our reserves where we're working in partnerships. And this is producing some fantastic outcomes for biodiversity. We are actually seeing improvement in biodiversity by getting right-way fire into these landscapes. In the southwest of WA, let's go back to that landscape. That's a landscape that has had a huge long-term history of fire suppression in areas where some fire is required through these landscapes. And when we're carefully and appropriately reintroducing it through cool and sporadic and heterogeneous burns, we're seeing the biodiversity bounce back. So that's one example for me where we're getting profound impact from our partnerships both on and off reserve.
Just jump in there. I'd love to acknowledge from an achievements point of view, we've established our own fire team within this window that we're celebrating right now, at this just past this midpoint. And I want to, a shout out to Reese Swain, who leads that fire team, to Vicky Parsley, our Aboriginal Partnership Manager, who works with the fire team so masterfully to get these outcomes. The momentum's exciting.
It's amazing to talk to a member of that team. If they get the call, if there's a lightning strike anywhere in Australia, that team gets mobilised and they're on the move very quickly, aren't they? And the team comes together to handle, control and put out the fires. It's great to watch them in action. So
and Matthew,
let's move.
can I also talk to our science partnerships? I just like to drop in a little bit about that because I'm so proud of the level of science. We are a small organisation, but we punch well above our weight in terms of delivering cutting edge science that is leading nationally, if not globally, in certain areas. We pushed out 27 research publications last year, which I think is absolutely fantastic for an organisation our size. We've got approaching 100 different research projects that involve collaborations with associated universities and the like. So we are really stepping up in terms of ensuring that it's leading edge science that's guiding our conservation outcomes. So very proud of all the ecologists, and it's not just the ecologists in bush heritage. There's a whole range of different staff who are engaging in these projects to step up and add impact through really great collaborations.
Important to acknowledge all the different parts of the organisation and what they contribute. Thanks, Bruce. So perhaps it's time to look ahead now. We've still got a lot of work to do. 2030, I think Rachel likes to articulate it this way, is a few months over the horizon, not multiple years. So it's coming up quickly. Can you, each of you, perhaps give us a perspective on the big plans that are in place to actually achieve those goals? We've got to climb that tree in that slide. We've got to get up there, haven't we? So perhaps if you can talk to us about, what that's like and if there's any challenges.
Yeah, I'm happy to, and we're talking 45 months. So what can we achieve now with the resources that we have and that we're going to be able to secure, the momentum that we've generated in this strategy? There is no doubt there are going to be some further acquisitions because there needs to be, again, to get that connectivity in these priority landscapes. For a number of those landscapes, it really is now or never. I actually purposely chose this background image because this will be the next win for Bush Heritage Australia. We are very much hoping to secure Wanara, which is next to Charles Darwin Reserve. It will more than double the size of Charles Darwin Reserve in the wheat belt there in WA on Buddy Myer and Woody Country. And it's over 107,000 hectares, but it's a crucial piece of the jigsaw puzzle, once again, that will connect up to over 1 million hectares from private conservation reserves through to Indigenous protected areas. So we've got that to look forward to, and we're going to be, through the upcoming tax appeal, asking for support to help land that particular win. And I feel really confident that people will back us in again, like they have before, because it's just a stunning example of what we need more of, quite frankly, as a nation. There are other properties that we are having a look at up in the Ainslie bioregion in Queensland, some of which I can't name at the moment because until we get closer to certainty and feasibility, you don't want whispers to get out there that we're looking at starting to negotiate deals for properties and end up driving land wreckers there to cut a better deal, quite frankly. But the Ainslie bioregion is one that we've already lost over 20% of that bioregion irrevocably, and that's quoted on the government's website, Queensland government's website. Some of the freshwater systems that run through there, for example, they simply just cannot be replaced. What's left, over 93% of that bioregion's grazed at present by cattle, but there are some significant wins still to be had in this critical decade in that bioregion, and we're attuned to them and we're working hard to consider how we can disrupt as well some of our fundraising models. Some of these underrepresented landscapes, they're underrepresented for a reason. The price per hectare is high. So if we think about the average price per hectare at the beginning of this strategy, about $35 a hectare, it's over 100 a hectare now. That's not just because prices have gone up, and they have. It's also because we're powered by science, and our science is driving us into these landscapes where the reason they're underrepresented is the business case for a national park didn't stack up, or an Indigenous protected area, or an organisation like ours, wasn't able to raise the funds through a typical tax appeal campaign. We're talking about properties that are starting to head up in the 20 million plus, and we'll have to see. We don't want to sit back and say, oh, well, too expensive, we'll let those ecosystems fall. We're looking at expanding our fundraising into the US, the UK, potentially Singapore, trying hard to share our science and the urgency with government further. Government have a 30 by 30 commitment. There are wins that we can achieve together, and we'll be exploring those further. We'll explore ecotourism partnerships potentially. You know, if there are landscapes that by unlocking funding from a different sector will ensure its protection, we need to be open to that. So there's a lot to look forward to in the next 5 years, and we can certainly guarantee that connectivity will continue to be a key priority, creating that connectivity in landscapes. What are you looking forward to in the next 5 years, Bruce?
Oh, Rachel, I'd like to start with that potential property pipeline. I think one of the most exciting parts of my job has been involved in exploring what's coming next in terms of reserve acquisition. Members of my team are actually involved in using science to guide where that happens. It's not just buying any property anywhere. We have a whole lot of science prioritizing where we're going to maximize our impact. And then we go out and we spend time on country looking at these properties, looking at the assets, looking at the potential for them to convert connectivity outcomes for us, the really critical biodiversity outcomes for us. And that's been a really exciting part of it. As Rachel said, this is incredibly heavy lifting that is required to secure these properties over the years ahead. But we need to be ambitious. We are at an absolutely critical time for nature conservation globally. In the last 200 or more years, this is a really critical time to get this right. And it's wonderful to be in a position to be able to contribute to that going forward. We need to be ambitious. We need to be chasing these properties because they will make substantial difference to where we end up with conservation outcomes nationally going forward. Beyond acquisition, I think, there's huge... Sorry, Rachel.
I was just going to say on that last slide, and I don't really want to cut you off because I know
No.
I think what you're about to say is very important. I just don't want to give anyone the impression that of those 59 properties that we're currently assessing, that 59 or even 50 will get through. My estimate is probably 3 of those 59 will get through. Then they get assessed for feasibility around fundraising. So that slide is giving you a sense of our zonation mapping and where the zonation mapping takes us to, and it takes us to where the threats are most severe and where there's underrepresentation and where there's connectivity potential. But I just important given that slide, people think, oh my gosh, you've got 45 months, how are you going to purchase another 59 properties? We won't. We won't at all, but I would guess probably about another 3 would come through from those active assessments. And you would have seen there's already there's 55 we've already said no to. We're very discerning about where we do put our energy. But sorry to cut you off, Bruce.
No, Rachel, that's a really good point to point out. It is a very thorough process that starts with a very broad assessment and then really narrows in the further we go with the information, the more we are able to hone in on what is going to give us the maximum impact.
Love to buy
it's
59.
Great.
Bruce, I believe you've got a cunning plan as well, involving lots of technology, lots of AI, and really speeding up and eDNA. We were listening to yesterday a great talk on that, which is environmental DNA. Can you just give us, for the tech heads amongst us, just a little bit of a sense of your vision of how that will help us?
Yes, and I will start prefacing this by the fact that there will be a lot of ecologists in the room as well, and my ecologists get nervous by when this discussion starts. It's like, oh, you're going to get rid of ecologists, and that is absolutely not the case. This is simply a way to make our existing ecologists more effective. We are always going to need boots on the ground, ground truthing, getting assessments in the field, going out and seeing things in real life, because that is the only place you can really come up with the questions that are simply not possible to harness with new technology. But there are other areas where new technology, particularly in the monitoring space, can make a profound difference in terms of our ability to understand a landscape. I've got a long heritage working with remote sensing, and remote sensing is allowing us to do things that were traditionally done by hand, the measuring of vegetation, for example. I've spent many years trudging through the bush with a tape measure, measuring the girth of trees. We can now do that by flying a LiDAR drone, which is a drone that sends out laser beams. It generates a point cloud, a high density point cloud of information that allows you to measure not only the height of the vegetation, it allows you to measure the biomass in that area. It allows you to measure the DBH of individual trees, profound from a single flight, and much of that can be automated through a back end that does the processing for you. So we're moving into an era where we have vast amounts of data coming in. But a lovely quote from a hero of mine, Edward Wilson, who's an amazing entomologist, is that you can have all the data I'm paraphrasing, you can have all the data in the world, but you still need wisdom. And so where I see this being particularly valuable is putting together the wisdom of our ecologists with these brand new data streams coming in from things like remote sensing. This is a diagram on the example there that shows the process of going from a fly over an entire forest with a LiDAR drone to that bottom left right-hand corner where that's the point cloud around the stem of an individual tree. Incredible. And when you ground truth that and when you check that against measurements with a tape measure, it's very accurate and spot on. So we will be making our ecologists far more efficient in the work they do. And that will free up more time for us to do that question-based research. And that's something that AI is not going to make a difference. It's something where you need an ecological brain sitting in the field, going out and asking questions and looking at the environment. And if we can free up time in our monitoring by doing that more effectively in an automated way, we can spend more time addressing those knowledge gaps. Addressing the knowledge gaps will allow us to improve management. We have a great deal of threats that we need to manage on our reserves going forward. Climate change remains a key driver of change in our landscapes. If we don't manage invasive species effectively, we're going to see a continual decrease in the quality of our environments. There's many things that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with them really well, but we can still do better. And that's where we're going to go. So onwards and upwards with our impact for sure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for giving us your insights. And it's great to hear the energy that's behind getting this strategy to fruition. There's been some questions coming up, so let's move into question time. The first one I think will come to you, Bruce, and it may need Megan to bring us back to the Fitzsterling slide you had up. You had on that slide some carbon farms, and there's a question from Judith who says, hello, Bruce, and could you please explain what the carbon farms are, and is that part of our business model? In enhancing the question, okay. But there's a bit of a story there, isn't there?
Yes, so let's unpack this. And what it's important to show on this slide is to understand the different colors on the slide. If you look at the light green, that's farmland. The lightest green is farmland areas. Then you have a slightly darker green, which is the remnant vegetation. And you can see that strongly in the Stirling Ranges and the Fitzgerald River National Park and in the bottom left and top right-hand corners. But then moving into that, you have some more colourful areas popping out. Now, the dark green there are our reserves, areas where Bush Heritage is actively managing the landscape. Some of those areas are remnant vegetation as well. And some of those areas, as we discussed earlier on, so Edie Garup, you can see almost in the centre there, it has large areas of cleared landscapes, and that's where we're revegetating with the air cedar that I mentioned before. There's also other private land conservation in this space. Greening Australia, for example, in the bright green, are also collaborating in this space with us and some of our re-veg work, but they also manage their own reserves in this space. And there's also private conservation in this space as well, in the yellow there. Now, the carbon farms that are there in orange are not ours. These are managed by other people. And carbon farming is really largely a way to generate credits to allow people to trade replanting of vegetation for carbon credits that they can spend elsewhere, for example, in terms of pollution. These are not under our management, so I'm actually not aware of how they've planted. Carbon plantings can be very variable in how they're done. They can be everything from large areas of single species plantations, essentially like plantations. And unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of those going in the WA wheat belt. They don't give the biodiversity outcomes that are possible in terms of doing carbon planting well. And some of the opportunities we're exploring in this space is about trading off a little bit of carbon per unit area under management for massive increases in terms of biodiversity value in those carbon plantings. And we are really seeing the market moving towards potentially paying a premium for these type of products, which, depending on how you enter the market and how you do it, and that needs to be done in an authentic way to make sure you're not seeing trade-offs in other spaces. But carbon can be done well, particularly when you add in biodiversity outcomes to the equation. So hopefully that clears up a little bit about what those carbon farms are in that picture and what we can potentially be doing with carbon farming as an organisation too.
Yes, thanks, Bruce. It's certainly something that anybody who's visited that landscape wonders when they see a plantation of sugar gums and go, that's not even native. What's it doing here? That's a sort of low value carbon farming, isn't it? Quite distinct from what we do, which is the highly biodiverse farming. So thanks for running us through that one. The next question comes from Faith, and this is it's talking to the tension that sometimes exists between perceptions in the agricultural industry and the conservation space, which is that sometimes there's criticism coming from agricultural industries that conservation is taking over productive land. I put some air quotes in here because these are fears. I think they're natural fears. And perhaps, Rachel, you can help us to understand how we navigate the fact that we are taking private land ownership of these sometimes ex-pastoral properties. And is it really true that conservation is threatening the viability of agribusiness or, upsetting the communities, changing the availability of staff? I think that's some of the concerns people have, usually motivated by fear of change, I suspect, but perhaps you can give a more elegant answer to that one.
I am certainly attuned to that tension, and I'm attuned to it for a number of reasons. One, I'm the daughter of a cattle farmer who went to studied ecology at university, so I'm attuned to it for family dinners, but also that there is, we can talk about a biodiversity crisis, but equally we can talk about, it's why we have this polycrisis challenge. There's food crisis coming our way for exponential growing population. And so we do consider impacts on food productivity and the agricultural sector when we consider where we purchase and where we don't purchase. But equally, the 30 by 30 target is one that asks all nations, not just Australia, to also place value on ecosystems in their own right and understand that some of these ecosystems, they could hold the cure for cancer one day. And also our food production system relies on the services of these ecosystems. And so we don't tend to come across that conflict much at Bush Heritage, largely, I think, because there is a very strong case for the level of underrepresentation and lack of protection for that particular ecosystem. And so the community, traditional custodians and neighbours, which can be agriculturalists, often have a very deep love for that landscape, and they can say, yeah, I get that. I get that we need to make sure that a bit more is protected because our strategy is not just opportunistic, let's purchase everywhere. I think the connectivity piece of our strategy helps us as well, because when we're wanting to purchase, we're often trying to link a private conservation reserve up to a national park or an Indigenous protected area. And again, that value proposition rings true and sound to neighbouring communities. Of the 9 properties that I ran you through before that we've purchased, very, very few have been retired cattle stations as such. So the other honest answer to this is often highly productive landscapes. We simply can't compete in the market for, and they're purchased pretty quickly by agriculture. So our message through to government, through to ag sector, through to our neighbours, and working with traditional custodians is back us in these last frontier spaces and let us build connectivity now. And we tend to find good support. And I think that's why our agricultural partnerships are booming the way they are, because there's a lot of trust in the process we go through. But the tension
Yes,
is certainly real.
because there's an awful lot of land out there, 50% of the country actually owned by agriculture, isn't there? And it's some of those big pastoral companies who are actually coming to us to say, we're going to still do primary production and run beef cattle, but can you help us look after the bits, the very special bits on our properties? And it's part of the rationale for having that second, third pillar, isn't it?
I think trust is key. I don't have permission to share the direct quote, but I'll just give you a sense. We actually put a bid on a property in the Fitzsterling that Bruce ran us through before, and we didn't get it. And we were outbid by an agricultural pastoralist company within this strategy window. And the agricultural pastoralist company that purchased it afterwards were, oh, well, sorry. And we really just, that's the connectivity we were after. And we've worked on that relationship over the last 2.5 years. And they're now saying, well, we don't need that bit. Like, you can come and plant out that bit. We need this bit. And so there are going to be times when there are compromises through those landscapes, but building trust with the sector is going to be key. So you can get those types of wins.
Excellent.
And it's not always a trade-off. I think the assumption that it's always going to be a trade-off is not always valid. And I've got a very good friend of mine is a farmer in the Western District of Victoria, and he's actually gone in and planted very biodiverse shelter belts to address connectivity issues on his landscape, and he's actually seeing yield increases in this space. There's also the expanding opportunities in terms of carbon markets and nature repair markets. So I think farmers are very open to the idea that biodiversity values and agricultural output can be very compatible in our landscapes going forward. And that's a conversation that we're helping to drive and helping to increase impact in our collaborations.
Excellent.
And some of our
Well,
greatest nature champions are farmers. Yeah.
Yep.
Indeed. We've got a few more questions before we wrap up. A couple of probably quite brief ones here, but there's a question for Bruce about right way fire. And the question is, does that increase resilience to subsequent bushfires?
Yes, it does. In short, it allows far more heterogeneous, so lots of different areas of burning in a given environment. So you won't see the very big burns going through after that because there's lots of different times since fire in a given landscape. And there's also generally more control over when those fires take place, what time of year. So they're called cool burns often. And so when they do go through a landscape, they'll go through at a lower intensity. So you have changes in the overall biomass available, and you have changes in the fire dynamics as it goes through that landscape. Both of those contribute to reducing the risk of those big raging bushfires that tear through landscapes and not only knock out really good biodiversity elements, but also threaten lives and property.
Thanks for that, Bruce. And there's a question from Ingrid, perhaps Rachel for you, which is, are we investing in coastal ecosystems and coastal areas? Because our map's very dotted on the interior, isn't it, with our reserves?
Certainly a few of the landscapes that we invest in, that by investing in that landscape, it's an investment in the coastal ecology as well. Friendly beaches in Tasmania is one, Palawa country. Ditto for Hamlin Reserve with those incredible stromatolites. The coast is literally right there, and our land management benefits that. So too for Yorka and the Ainsley bioregion that I mentioned. In fact, the science is becoming more and more compelling that land management practices, even that far in from the Great Barrier Reef, do have flow-on impacts through to the reef. So they're three that jump to mind.
I'd also talk to our partnerships with Woonabugambra up in the Kimberley, yes, Rachel, as well. Lots of sea country in that part of the world.
So there's some linkages for sure.
So thank you. there's a question also in terms of, and I think this is a really important one, which is, is the Bush Heritage team seeing climate change impacts already on our reserves? Because it's very hard to, I know, pick out from extreme weather events which are happening and impact people immediately, to then look into that long-term trend and go, is it actually getting worse? How's it changing? And are we noticing climate change impacts, given all the floods, the fires and the cyclones? And I guess the core of the question is the change, is it getting worse for us faster than we hoped it would?
Yes, we're definitely seeing the impacts that can only be explained by climate change. Bruce, I know we're tight on time. What are some of our best examples that we can give to just demonstrate that?
Yeah, there's a long answer and a short answer. A long answer, I could talk on this for days, but the short answer is, and I think one of the most profound for us, talks to how plants regenerate in the landscape. And the most vulnerable time for a plant to establish itself and persist is when it's just a little seed that's just started to germinate. They're very vulnerable at that stage. And what we're finding in terms of our regeneration in some of our reserves is that the window of opportunity when that vulnerable, to get through that vulnerable stage and get resilient in that landscape, we're getting fewer of those opportunities lining up. And so what we may see in the future is that you don't get good regeneration happening every single year. It's only every second year or third year or fourth year. And so we have these destabilizing factors kicking in. And if we miss one or two of those years, you suddenly have up to a decade or more where there's been no regeneration. And if you then have a fire sweep through that landscape, because fires are getting bigger and more profound, the input of seed back into the soil doesn't happen as frequently. And if that doesn't happen as frequently, you don't have as much seed to germinate, and you can quickly see how this can start to spiral. And it's these tipping points, the cascading interactions, that are some of the biggest scary threats we face with climate change. But again, that's something that we're throwing science at to find a solution.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Now, here's a question I haven't put my brain to before. It's from David, and he's saying that connectivity doesn't necessarily mean adjacent properties. It could also mean an archipelago where you've got reduced separation distances between suitable habitat patches. And his question is that one of the things we consider in our acquisition process of assessing properties that come our way?
It is, and we've been actively assessing one at the moment in New South Wales that, we'd love to be able to pick up the jigsaw puzzles and do that, but that's not always what we get. We think that by investing in that landscape, for example, we will still get the benefit of connectivity, even though it's not, as you say, directly adjacent. Yeah.
Particularly for more mobile species, it's a very good point. It is certainly possible, and mobile species help to carry other species that are not so mobile.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we've got just two more quick questions I can get to. There was one from Mary Ellen about whether we run volunteer vegetation planting programs in WA's Stirling Fitzgerald region. And Bruce, as you're such a fan of that region, I'm sure you can answer on behalf of the field teams that yes, indeed, there are volunteer planting sessions.
No, that's correct. And sitting just here adjacent to me in HQ is our volunteers having a meeting planning out their strategy for the next 2 years. So they are incredibly active at organising volunteering opportunities. So I would strongly encourage you to get in touch if you are keen to help volunteer on some of our reserves. Please do.
Couldn't do what we do without our volunteers.
We couldn't do half the work, could we? Well, so Mary Ellen, you can go online and register to be a volunteer if you're not already, and one of the team will get in touch with you and have a chat and find out how you can come along and bring some of those planting skills. Last question, I think, is that someone is obviously a fan of our podcast, Big Sky Country, and is asking whether there is going to be another series after the huge success of Tiani this year. And I believe the answer to that is a new series is being looked into for the coming year. So I can't promise more than that. No cute YouTube videos giving promotions for the new season yet, but we've certainly found it to be a great success and love doing it. So I think keep your eyes out on that, unless, Rachel, you wish to declare more on that subject, I think it's in planning, isn't it?
Yeah, we're just weighing up. In all honesty, there's so many more people we want to listen to the first 3 seasons, and they are resource intensive. So we're going to take a bit of time to just promote the ones that we have. So please do spread that good word, so we can increase the return on investment of those 3 seasons, and then we'll find the funding down the line to bring more stories out there through that incredible podcast. It's a wonderful one.
Great, thank you for that. So I think we're at time, folks. So there's a couple of questions we couldn't get to. We will, of course, as usual, get in touch with you via email to make sure that we can cover off everybody's questions there. A couple of those are these webinars available to look at again? And absolutely, all the Bush Broadcast webinars are available on the website, and you can access them at any time. Megan, our wonderful producer, will have this one up probably by the end of the day. If you are so keen to watch this one again and listen to it, because it was fairly energy and information rich, feel free to share these with friends, family, colleagues, anyone who has a passion for nature and interest in our conservation stories. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Bruce, for coming along today and sharing your stories and wisdom and excitement. And of course, a shout out to all our wonderful supporters who continue to back us in undertaking all the vital conservation work we do, and who actually make it possible to have a bold strategy such as we have, because without you, we certainly wouldn't be as ambitious as we are being. I'd also like to flag that you're probably seeing in our latest communications, which are coming out, that we're focusing on saying thank you to all our supporters. It's something we realise is so important, and not everybody wants every communication to be and please put your hand in your pocket to help us. But there's some beautiful stories out there, so please take time to read the existing communications that are going out. It's really a thank you to you guys for all the support you give. Whether you're a volunteer, whether you're thinking of us in your will, whether you're a donor, or whether you simply bring some skills or pro bono ability to help us, it's all incredibly appreciated. So a deep, heartfelt thank you for allowing us to grow over 35 years from what was really a very small idea in Bob Brown's head originally to now seeing Bush Heritage as a national conservation leader with some truly inspiring goals. So thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all next time when we'll be doing a deep dive, and that will be looking at the volunteering programme, getting into detail about what that involves, what people get out of it, what they can contribute, and what a huge difference it makes to the organisation. So goodbye from myself, from Rachel, from Bruce, thank you, and till the next time. And of course, a few slides at the end to see you on the way. Bye now.